Okay, so welcome everyone to the Knoca workshop on communicating climate assemblies. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. A reminder, as ever, we are recording, but the only people who get recorded are people who are speaking or in the spotlight. So don't worry about that if you are concerned about such things. Um, it's an absolute pleasure to be launching this guidance today, because Knocker has been very concerned about the question about impact of climate assemblies. We managed to produce some quite a bit of guidance which kind of focuses on building follow-up processes, getting follow-up in place, the internal organization of bureaucracies and political support and things like that. But I think one of the missing elements of our guidance has been communications. We actually started working on communications back in 2022, 23, and there's an old event on our on our YouTube channel. Unfortunately, due to changes of jobs, that work actually got dropped. But we're absolutely delighted that about a year ago we started working with Camille Dobler from Mission Publique, who has done a fantastic job kind of pulling together lessons from across different climate assemblies. She's engaged with a number of individuals who are responsible for communications across different countries, across different levels of governance. And I think it's the first sort of systematic guidance on how to communicate citizens' assemblies, let alone climate assemblies. So we're incredibly grateful for Camille, really looking forward to hearing what she has to say about the work that she's done. And I'm really also grateful to Tessa Dunlop from the Joint Research Council at the European Commission, and Jamie Kelsey-Fry from One World or None, who have agreed to offer a few thoughts to get the conversation going on Camille's work. We really would love you to make any comments that you've got about what Camille is saying as she's presenting. We'd love you to put down some experience maybe that you've had of communicating, whether it's been a positive experience or a negative experience. The negative ones are always the most interesting, I think. But without further ado, I would like to hand over to Camille. I would first of all say once again celebrate the fact that this guidance has appeared. It's a really valuable piece of work. And Camille, do you want to introduce us to the work you've done? It only got published yesterday, so I'm not assuming
Yes,
that
it's
everybody
out.
on this call has read it. But there's a lot of people who are into climate assemblies. Maybe they have. Let's not assume they haven't. So over
Yes,
to you, Camille.
thank you very much, Graham, and hello everyone. So my name is Camille, and Graham, thank you for the kind introduction. I feel the need to add that I am not actually a professional policy communicator, so I come from the field more of research, I would say, and policy analysis, and I identify as a practitioner, and it has been also a big learning journey for me writing this brief, and so I hope that others can benefit from it for their own work. And just before I start, I just wanted to give credit also to the more than 20 people that I have interviewed last year. So there's a lot of people actually in the field that have contributed directly, indirectly to this guidance document. I cannot mention them because GDPR, and we take GDPR seriously. But if they are here in this call, I'd be very happy also if during the discussion they jump in and they contribute to the discussion. And perhaps before I start, I have 15 minutes. I have prepared a couple of slides, so I am going to share my screen now. But I would like to start by just saying this. So together with Graham, because also Graham, you've been a big help in putting this guidance together. We really have tried to make this guidance document as practical as possible, because we've been in the shoes of people who have to implement or organize a climate assemblies and realize that, well, actually I am not a communicator. I don't really know what to do when it comes to communication, but I know it is important. But the thing is that when you want to design communicate or you want to do communication work nowadays more than ever, you really quickly realize that it's more complicated than it seems. You are really, you know, struggling with literal structural barriers around you, and so there is not one fits all solution to any of the problems. So the objective of this guide is twofold. First of all, to give you as much I would say, practical tools as possible, where it was possible. And it's not always possible because each assembly is unique and also structural barriers around us and challenges. But also a second objective, which is just actually to get us to think a little bit more about communication. I do not know about you, perhaps some in the room. I know we are 30 now, are actually professional communicators, so you do that quite a lot. But at least from where I was coming from, and from the many people also that we interviewed in the making of this brief, it was evident that communication is important, but it's still very much an afterthought too often. While it is actually becoming more and more important because, as you all know now, we are increasingly living in a public sphere where we say there are battles of ideas, battles of narratives. And so communication is actually becoming much more about strategy and much less about promotion. So just forcing ourselves to think a little bit more about it is, I guess, one of the objectives of this brief. So you have 12 steps in this brief, and we try to make very practical with the before, during, and after. I'm not going to take you through the 12 steps of this guide because that could take us the hour. And if you are very curious, of course, I think that Democracy X and Knoca colleague have already shared the link in the chat. But I would like to focus on 7 of them, which for me were perhaps the most surprising in the sense that it some of them are pretty straightforward and we intuitively have an understanding that they are important. Others actually did not come up as salient as I thought during the interviews, while actually when you talk to communicators, they're absolutely essential. And that's where also you realize that there is sometimes a mismatch between the expertise of practitioners and organizers on the one hand, and the particular expertise that communication requires. And so I would like to focus on 7 of them. But perhaps before we start, or actually the first point, it was originally step 0, but Graham told me it needed to be step 1. So now it is step 1. And he's actually trying to make a little, even more the point that I actually already made now, which is trying to convince you communication is no longer about promotion. Perhaps it was a couple of years ago. I'm not sure. That's debatable. But for sure, when it comes to Climate Assembly, it is not about promotion. It is not about how many KPI, about how many people have read this article that you have published online, how many your KPI for your website. It's really a part of your impact strategy. And that requires also a different kind of expertise. I mean, or at least it requires that the team within your organization team that works on the design, on the policy follow-up and the communication work very closely together, which is very rarely the case, actually, because we have a tendency to segment expertise and leave a little bit people in their boxes. Why this is important? Because there are different types of climate assemblies, of course. And when you ask people, why would you even want to communicate? A lot of people say, okay, it's because I want to have impact. Okay, but then what kind of impact? I want to have political impact. I want my decision, or whatever comes out of my climate assembly to really have some sort of follow-up. That is the one that we all have, it's called political buy-in. It is the one that we all have a tendency to go towards too. But there is another which I wanted also to actually there are 2 others that I wanted also to put in this brief because they did not really come out very strongly in the interviews. But when you talk to communication professionals, they said this actually very 2 potential untapped impacts that we are not currently pursuing. And those are the one on public debate and inclusion. And public debate here is not necessarily about, I know that there is a hot policy topic in society and I really want things to move forward. It's more, I want to put something on the political agenda. So it's more about politicization really of an issue. And that is also something that perhaps is going to become more and more important as climate assemblies move from being organized by the top and more organized by bottom, by CSO organization notably. And that requires a very different types of communication strategy. Yes, and also communication for inclusion. As we know, and it's a little bit of a taboo still sometimes in the field. I guess we don't really talk about these things really openly, but it can be difficult to recruit participants. And of course, this link between the mini and the maxi public remains one of the weak spots of citizens assembly, notably on climate, and also use communication already before you start your climate assembly to help notably with the recruitment is also something that has not necessarily been done a lot. Normally, communication starts when the assembly starts, and that's also something that is an untapped potential of your communication strategy, and another reason why you need to link it and think about it ahead. Thank you, Mark. I see that you are working on the eco issue. Moving forward, perhaps the second message, second important thing that I wanted to say, again, if you're not a communication professional, you tend to think that, okay, I want to reach out to the maxi public, but you don't really actually spend a lot of time thinking who is actually the maxi public and who is the public I want to talk to. And if there is one thing that every communication professional will tell you is that if you try to reach to the right public, most likely you're not going to reach to anyone. And so if you look at the few climate assemblies that have actually managed to really have some sort of resonance in the public sphere, what they have done is really taking this step, a preliminary step, very seriously, which is a step of what we could call the sort of audience mapping, which is again here really a strategic exercise. So who are actually the actors who can act on the recommendation? Are there policymakers? Are there administrations? Are there some sort of agencies, implementing bodies? Perhaps there are actually some stakeholders groups. Who are the ones that can block? Who could eventually create some troubles, mobilize the press, and write some nasty articles to destroy your processes. So political opponents, skeptical stakeholders, organized interest. Then who can amplify? Who would be your ally? Try to map a little bit who might be the media, the experts on the topic, civil society, community networks. And then who might need reassurance because they might be suspicious about the topic or just about the process, depending on the country where you are organizing assembly, it might still be very new. So there might be people who are not yet necessarily opponents, but they are not allies yet. And there might be also a bit of a tailor approach. And it's important to do this exercise because often communication is not generously budgeted, with some notable exceptions. And so you will not have the resources to reach out to everyone. So trying to understand really what are the sweet spots or what are the sweet people. I don't know how you would say that in English, but perhaps what are the publics that are the most important for you and who are the multipliers that can help you reach this audience is absolutely crucial if you do not have a lot of resources. So really something that should not be underestimated, that in these assemblies that have done it well, they have started doing that at least 6 months, between 6 and 3 months before the assembly actually started. So once you have done that, of course, you want to reach out to your allies. And here actually you will see in the brief, I'm trying to challenge you a little bit to see beyond the traditional media equals my only possible ally. Because there are actually a lot more potential allies. I mentioned stakeholders before. They can be an audience. They can also be an ally. There is a lot of very powerful professional networks, and this is something, for example, in Ireland, they do very well. So mobilizing these networks, experts networks can also be very powerful depending on your context. But I know in our community, I mean, at least around practitioners and among public organizers, we tend to really over-focus on the media. So I still suggest a slide here to talk a little bit about the media because I'm anticipating some follow-up question. And here, there is perhaps one thing that really struck me around the more than 20 interviews that we did together with my colleague is that when we were engaging on the discussion on how to reach with media, it was obvious that everybody was thinking about generalist media. And sometimes we think about, okay, there is the press, sometimes the radio, and then there is social media. Yes, that's true. There is social media and the traditional media, but there is also generalist versus specialist, specialized media. And here we are discussing climate assembly, and actually on environmental and climate issues, there is a very, very rich, depending on your country, but I'm pretty sure that in all EU countries it is the case, a very rich and diverse offer of both online and traditional media specialized on environmental and climate issues. And one of the big also reason why the French Climate Assembly was so successful, it's really because on top of one or two traditional generalist media, the specialized press was really pushing and overcovering really the Climate Assembly a lot. And they do have extensive network both online and among community leaders, among NGOs. So they really play a huge multiplier effect not to be underestimated. And sometimes they are much easier actually to bring on board than the generalist press. So perhaps if there is something, one lesson, one big lesson to remember from this 15 minutes presentation on the media is like try to broaden a little bit your box and try to dig into the specialist media. I mentioned there, of course, you will see in the guidance every time we try to mention also some examples, inspiring cases of assemblies for you to seek inspiration. I can't stop and zoom on each of them for the purpose of this presentation. On this one, I made an exception because I think it's quite telling. So you can see that, for example, in the case of the Bourgogne-Franche-Comté Climate Assembly, which was a regional climate assembly, they had very limited budget for communication, which is most likely the case when you organize an assembly and you're not the French government, which is really the counterexample. And here that shows actually to really go for quality on board one single local on board from the beginning, one single journalist from the public TV channel. And this journalist was onboarded and followed the entire process. So instead of spreading and trying to play, on different with different types of media, they're really focused on one. And then that worked actually pretty well. They got very good local coverage. Very different strategy followed, for example, in Germany and in Ireland. Once you have your multiplier, this is another thing that people are asking themselves a lot. I have my multipliers. I have perhaps managed to onboard my journalist. I have done my strategic mapping, and I'm all ready. But now, what is the story that I'm going to tell? And a lot of us, and a lot of actually, the interview started becoming conversation at this point. Should I communicate on the process, or should I communicate actually on the issue? What is the better story to be told? And obviously here, actually, we should not pick any of those. Different types of media will be interested in different things. So going back to my slide before, specialized media will be more interested in the issue story. Journalists or platform social media might be more interested in the process story. The good thing is that we actually have everything we need as Climate Assembly organizers to give them elements to tell any of these two stories. It's just about tailoring and making sure that we give the right information to the right people. One thing that is for certain, though, is that we need to drop a little bit the narrative of grand ideas and face heads on the real trade-off. And by that, I mean not saying everything is catastrophic on one hand, or that we can change the world. To some extent, there is a little bit this doom or wishful thinking is one of the most common traps often when among us, perhaps enthusiasts who are very enthusiastic about what we do, is that we put a lot of emotions and we put a lot of conviction in what we do. But when it's about communicating, either whether it's the story or the issue, it's not necessarily about tuning it down, but it's really about making visible that this is not necessarily going to be a magic solution, but it can help it and how. So make it very concrete and trying to make it concrete also in the short term and at the local level. So how is it going to help me? What is it going to help here and now for me at my local level. So avoiding the trap of doom and wishful thinking, I would say this is the one we as a community tend to fall the most into. We have become quite aware of a tendency to use a lot of jargon. So this one, perhaps, I think if you have a good communicator, you also have some translator skill, it's easy to avoid. And of course, the green Eileen story, also, but that is also, I think, something that we are very aware, being very careful about not framing this also too much as an activist project. But again, it depends on the impact you want to do. Perhaps for some types of impact, this is definitely something you would be interested in. You will find a bit more detail on the guidance on this. And now, whom do you
Camille,
want?
you're going to
Yeah,
need to speed up a little bit, I'm afraid.
yes, I'm almost done.
That's a
But I have still two more slides, and I know that Jamie will pick up on this one, so I can accelerate. But who do you want to speak then and tell these stories? And here again, there is massive consensus among assembly organizers and practitioners that actually assembly members are the best communicators. And yet, so few climate assemblies have actually dedicated resources to support assembly members to take that role of communicators. So there is a little bit of a paradox there. It is slowly starting in the last year. This is something we do more and more as organizers, communicators, and facilitators. But this is something that clearly this brief we have identified as something that should continue. And most importantly, that should start before the end of the assembly. So far, it's still very much something that happens towards the end when recommendation starts to, materialize. But this is something that you need to support from the beginning and also make time for within your process. So this is also something to factor in. And here again, that's why it's important to have communicators working with facilitators, with the designers, because this is something to include within your agenda, to speak bluntly. Jamie, please allow us to come back on this in the Q&A after. And perhaps one thing I wanted to also mention, because it did not come up in a lot of interviews, but it came in a few. And unfortunately, we might expect this to come a little bit more and more, as perhaps it won't be the case, but as there are also some changing political agendas, changing political coalitions in governments right now, and the climate issue might be moving more towards implementation phase rather than agenda setting. We might be facing some sort of more and more attacks. And what is surprising is that we as a community also are very aware of what are the attacks that we are sometimes subject to, or arguments against, because they are always actually on the process. They're very rarely on the outcomes. So they're always they're always the same. I have listed them there in the left columns, but there is actually, to my knowledge, I don't know it. And all the people that I spoke, none of them had a sort of crisis communication kit ready to anticipate those, and they all learned the hard way. Now, this is not to say that you need to spend a crazy amount of resources preparing for the worst, but it could have saved a lot of stress and mental load, I think, to many assembly organizers to have a very simple plan ready for when this happens. And we have recent evidence from the Netherlands. I don't know if some of them are here, they can testify to it, that this might happen and might happen more and more. So pre-bunk, respond, protect, having clear roles also within the team of who does what. This is something that very few assembly have been doing, and that they have paid a rather hard price in amount of stress. So something also to anticipate. And perhaps last but not least, but that's an easy one, as communication work always stops for some mysterious reason when the assembly stops. Well, actually, since we've said at the very beginning that this is all about impact, actually the battle of whether your assembly is going to be impactful or not, it's rather being fought after the assembly is over. And I think a very good example, and we are among the Knoca community here, this is being taught also by the French Climate Assembly. I think in the French climate opinion, the assembly has been completely impactless. While Graham and others among this network, you have also written a brief that said that actually it did have an impact, a policy impact. But if there is nobody anymore to communicate about it, the perception of this impact is inexistent, and so the narrative battle, if we call it like this, is lost. So that is also a pity and a plea also to, when you budget your communication work, really make it last as much as you can and integrate it to the follow-up. And I will stop there, and I welcome Tessa and Jamie for feedback.
Thank you so much, Camille. That was really interesting and really fascinating. Thank you, and I think you captured some of the really key elements of the guidance. I've got a couple of things I want to pick up with you about which you said, but we'll leave that to the panel. But at the moment, we will let Camille have a cup of tea or a coffee, and move over to Tessa. Tessa Dunlop is not from the Joint Research Council, as I said. It's from the Joint Research Centre. There is a Joint Research Council in the UK. I'm sorry about that. The Joint
Well
Research
done, Graham.
Centre
No, well done.
of the
We
of
are,
the
we are in the middle of Italy, and not everyone knows about us. So thank you for getting the name right. Appreciate
No,
it.
no, no. It's important. It's a really good work you're doing. So, Tessa, we'd be really interested to hear your sort of thoughts on this document that Camille that we've released into the world. So, over to you.
Thanks, Graham, and thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. Well, a big congratulations to Cami and the Knoca team. This is a much needed piece of work. And there was really a gap to fill. So you've done it with, comprehensively and really concisely. So really, what a nice piece of work. I think this really solidifies action on something that we've all known for some time is needed, which is for better communication. And what I really think that this report gets right is that we're not just looking at practical information. You could do just like a laundry list of this is the things you need to do. But from a governance perspective, it's really about getting to the heart of what transparency means, which for me is not just putting everything on a website. It's actually a responsibility to ensure that all citizens and the broader publics know about these processes that are affecting them. And the guidance also talks about these more in-depth issues about it's about inclusivity, it's about the relationship with the media, advocacy, and really innovative ways of collaborating and communicating. And as Kenny said, it's about connecting the mini public to the maxi public, which I think in the field we know is a space that needs to be focused on. But from a policy perspective, I think a lot of people out there are also focusing on that to see how that is developing and what are those links there, and the potential political buy-ins. It's a really critical area. And I think I really like how you place front and center the point about planning and thinking about the wider audience at all stages of design. So things just like, the recommendations aren't just for the policymakers who's going to receive them or just for the participants. They're really a valuable and trustworthy information source that can be used for much wider discussion. And as you point out, used in innovative ways to even include wider publics in the deliberative process itself. I think one issue going forward that perhaps we need more work on is how we look at the assessment and measurement of communication efforts. I'm not to say that this always needs to be done, but I think I see a demand there for people coming and saying, well, look, we want to show the impact of this process. How can we do it? What are the methods we can use? And one of the fear is that, or the concern is that perhaps they might not have established early on what in fact their objectives were. And it might be something simple as just like our objective was just to do the event and that we were going to communicate about it. And of course, that's not enough. We know that's not enough from this guidance. And so is it a conversation about, well, do we actually want to make sure that, for instance, if this is your objective, policymakers actually listen to what citizens have to say and take their views seriously? And so then what does that mean for how you're so-called measuring impact or how you're communicating about that? It changes the conversation completely. And then another thing I think going forward that I am particularly interested in is we have a lot of knowledge, fantastic knowledge from the field, from organisers and commissioning bodies about what works and what doesn't. Of course, we're going to talk about that later on. But I'm really curious to know about the media side and what their general understanding is of democratic innovations. You pointed out that it's a diverse media landscape. You've got journalists, influencers, but still, I think there could be more work done in that area to talk to them. I mean, it's just, I'm still surprised and wonder why you have media articles that might be talking about, for example, a major passage of legislation and not mention a citizens' assembly that might have happened 2 years prior that was really critical to that passage of legislation. So is that a question of like, did they know about it? Did they not have enough space? And does someone need to call that journalist and try to correct the story if that was really important to that story? So yeah, I think there's, as I said, the space to explore that, I think, and to learn from the media and from them to learn from us as well. So in some, communicating climate assembly is far from easy, but this report absolutely shows that it can be done. And so I find it really inspiring that you've been able to tackle such a tricky topic. So well done.
Yeah, thank you, Tessa. That's really great. Thank you. And let's pick up some of those comments you made with Camille in the panel afterwards. So thanks, Tessa. I'd like to hand over to Jamie Kelsey-Fry. Jamie runs an organisation called One World or None, and has been particularly interested in the voice of members. Maybe he's not going to talk about that, but my guess is he probably is. So I shall pass over to Jamie.
Thanks, Graham. One of the words you used to describe Camille's awesome paper is it's the first systemic analysis, and I love the way that it's systemically broken down. It's fantastic. One of the things, yeah, I'm definitely going to talk about the power of the greatest advocates being the assembly members. There's so much in that. And I'll open it by talking about the Global Assembly. So in 2021, I was one of the co-founders of the world's first global citizens assembly, chosen by Saltution on climate. And we're making a film about it. So we have to get in touch with about 180 people. Every one of them go, where did you go? And what Camille's pointing out, I think is really important towards the end of her presentation, is there's a whole section of work. I'd say at least 50% of the work is what happens after the assembly. And to go back to these assembly members, they're all completely transformed by the experience, and particularly with the global one. So, you're talking about Farhat Parveen, so an elderly woman living in a village in Pakistan, who was saying to us, before the Global Assembly, we all thought that all these floods were our sins. And now that we've had the Global Assembly, it's not our sins, it's, fossil fuels, right? So I'm going around all the villages telling everyone, these stories are amazing. And in terms of journalists, look, when you're working with journalists, they're going, what is it? You start telling them what sitting assemblies, they're going, you've got to find the hooks, and the hooks are, number one, these incredible people, right, who are reflective of society, ordinary people. I had one ITV presenter I was explaining it to her, she wasn't getting it, and then I was telling her how the people were brought together. This is the Cumbrian Assembly done with Pete Bryant and Shared Future. And she was going, oh my God, that's like our golden chalice. And I was going, what do you mean? She said, well, actually, ordinary people you never see. Ordinary people, you might stop them in the street. She got very excited about it. Now think about the political aspects of what we're doing. Really important, as Camilla says, this is not an activist gig. And it's so easy to be painted into the lefty kind of red, greeny gang, right? It's just not. This is an evolution in the way, a completely natural evolution in the way that humans make decisions together, right? And so what's fascinating is what happens when ordinary people see themselves, basically. And that's all shapes and sizes and colours and political backgrounds. So what's fascinating with climate in particular is you have the new messengers. They're not the messengers from Greenpeace. They're not the messengers from Extinction Rebellion. They are Sean the Roofer, who's generally kind of reform leaning, right? So in this country, that's what you may call the far right populist group, for want of better language, who's going, I had this opinion. I went through the assembly. Look, folks, I've got to tell you, it's not what you think. Actually, this is really serious. Then you've got messengers that people go, oh, well, that's like, Jim down the end of the road. That's like my Auntie Doris. That's massive. There's so much breakthrough just in this, in working with the people who were in the assemblies. Another thing is, yeah, so I'll just make double clear in case I haven't been clear enough already. This is where the massive impact happens. Politicians obviously go, well, we have a citizen assembly. It's called Parliament. Leave us alone, right? They don't realise these are your voters. These are the people who can make the decisions you're absolutely terrified of making. There has to be an understanding from them. What's in it for me? And in fact, a huge amount. But that understanding needs to be bridged. One of the things that we're doing with One World on None next in a couple of weeks' time, we're bringing together 3 assembly members, 3 practitioners, one of them being Graham, but also very influential people in the political world who need to hear the story of what's in it for you, right? Another thing, assembly members. Oh yeah, I've done that one. Carpets. All right. So I know 5 minutes. As you can tell, there's so much I could go on about, but I'll just finish on this. So our beloved Graham Smith here, right? He's famous for his carpets story, right? So what Camille's open up on, and I will answer. I will answer what's going on in your mind at the moment, which is why the hell is he talking about carpets? But what Camille's open up on is the fundamentals, the real work. In her paper, she says, I think you should get your media comms team together 3 months before the assembly. Absolutely. This has to be seriously budgeted if you genuinely want an impact in your assembly, right? But there's the relationship she talks about, this really interesting marrying between the process nerds. They all don't mind me saying that, but the process experts and the communications expert. That's fundamental what Camilla's saying. And my argument, and here comes the carpets, ladies and gentlemen, is the creatives. So Graham Smith's famous point is, look at the carpets for the assemblies. And it's such a clever way of doing it. They're rubbish carpets. So what I'm getting at is we've started One World or None. We're going to be running art events in 12 countries this year. And and Graham, we helped to run an artist collective called Hard Art. It's all about what happens when you start working with creatives, cultural influential people, brilliant minds, but they're creative artists, musicians. And then you start finding opening up these incredible avenues of communications about assemblies that are kind of really ripe. And we're just touching on it now. And I think it's really vital. 2 hooks for your journalists, and then I'll shut up, right? So one hook is this. Yeah. And I know these work because I've tried them out loads, right? So one is, these are anti-polarization machines. That really works. Then you tell them the story of the same-sex marriage assembly in Ireland and Finbar and Chris, for example, but there's many, many Finbar and Chris's. That's a real hook. At a time where humanity is so profoundly polarized and fragmented, people coming together with opposing views, I would hate that person, and by the end, I love you, man, I got you so wrong. That's a brilliant story. Happens all the time. But the other one, in a time when misinformation travels 6 times more quickly and reaches 4 times more people than information, we have an oasis of credible information in an infinite desert of misinformation, lies, and propaganda. This is really rich. These are the kind of things that where journalists go, oh, rather than explaining how it works and la la la, they need their hooks. I think that's probably 5 minutes, and I really hope that's useful. I could go on forever, Camille. You've done a brilliant bit of work, mate. It's a sort of founding step as far as I'm concerned.
I can attest to the fact that he could go on for longer. So could we bring Camille in and Tessa as well? That would be really nice. Camille, we've got a couple of questions in the chat, which we'll come to in a second, but I just wondered if you wanted to respond to anything that Jamie and Tessa had raised.
Yes.
I was particularly taken by Tessa's comment about the sort of low level of understanding and how you deal with that. And also Jamie's point about, the assembly members saying, where did you go? Where did the assembly organisers disappear to? And I think these are pointing towards really critical problems for us. So I mean, anyway, you may want to respond to some other things.
Yeah, about the low level of understanding, it's a low level of understanding of policymakers, journalists, of actually many people. We tend to have a professional, we are swimming in our swimming corridor, and then we forget that other people are not necessarily sharing the same jargons than we are, and have their own swimming corridors. And I think that's realistically knowing also how challenging it is to wanting to do everything right when you organize the climate assembly, from communication to facilitation to ensuring policy follow-up. You need to be strategic. You cannot, I think, we all go into this process with wanting to change the world and doing the best, but you need to be realistic also about what you can humanly do. And that's why very first thing that I'm trying to really insist on, I know it's intuitive, but yet we have the tendency to jump over that first step because we don't want to give up on all the things we could do. Like, you need to pick your battles. So you need to pick your impact. What is the kind of impact that you want? What are the key stakeholders you would want to talk to? And then you need to serve them on a golden platter, I would say, whatever documents or communication tools to help them understand. But it's true that based on who they are, the translation from our jargon to theirs can be very different. And you will not talk to a specialized media, to a journalist media, to a policymaker, or even a policymaker that is a parliamentarian versus a public servant like Tissa, very different posture. And also your posture as an assembly organizer is going to be fundamentally different. And you don't want to have to, play. I mean, perhaps you can if you have infinite resource and an infinite team, but I would strongly advise to go for quality over quantity here, because this translation work is still not something we do very well, but we could. It's just about focusing on what it is and to whom I want to translate in priority. And actually we do, because Tessa, you also mentioned that there is some, we need a bit more research on what are the different communication methods that really work. We know, and I didn't mention it here, but in the brief, and there's over Knoca guidance, we know that there are certain moments in your process where you are more likely to have resonance, which is one form of impact, but might not necessarily be political buy-in. But even that, we do not usually. The risk stops after the recommendation are over, or perhaps very 6 months after. But over time, it's very difficult to have data, longitudinal data that covers a long period of time. So that's certainly a shortcoming. One thing that we do not really know yet, to my knowledge, at least I could not find, is really the impact of using social media versus traditional media. There is still a lot of skepticism in the field, but these things are, I mean, media practices are evolving so fast that I also think we should be mindful about holding prejudices against social media, because this, in 2 years, it might be that nobody is looking even at generalist printed press anymore. Who knows? There are very strong generational passions here. So also, if you want to have an citizen assembly and the main thing you want to do is encourage a change of behaviors among Gen Z, obviously you need to have a social media almost exclusive communication strategy. So hence back to whom it is that I want to talk to. So that was my
can I just push a couple of questions to you from the chat? One is from Daniel, and he's asking about whether or not people are generally getting it better at funding communication, because in the past there's been a huge variation in funding, and I know that's something that you've commented on in the report. And Rabia is asking about whether or not that there are guidelines for guest journalists about particularly the sort of struggle between safe space for participants and journalists interested in full access. And again, I think these are things which you've seen variations in practice, haven't you?
Yes. So for the budget, to Daniel, one of my objective, and I hope one of our common objective with this brief, that it helps you go toward whoever is the person giving you a budget and say, okay, I need more budget for communication, because this is actually really important. So, but this is one of the indirect objective of this brief, is to help you secure a bigger budget. It's difficult to say really if over the last years there has been more budget, because assemblies varied so much in size. And also, depending on the country, it's depending on their nature, if they're top down, bottom up, more hybrid, you cannot really generalize. But one thing is important when we are thinking about budget, is that we tend to think about budget in terms of just money. Well, actually, communication is also a lot of, it's about time, and it's about staff. So there are 3 kinds of resources really that you need. You need, of course, money, perhaps to print things, eventually to hire a contractor, I don't know, plan a communication campaign on bus stops, but you also need to be people with the expertise in your team, and ideally a team that is able also to understand and work with, the facilitators, the designers, for the reason that and vice versa. So there needs to be cross understanding of each other's perspective, and that's an issue. Because often, communications are staffed in another different department. Um,
But
and
Camille, one thing
yeah,
I wanted to kind of pick up on that
yeah,
was the way that even now, too often budgets end at the end of the participation process. It is incredibly hard to get commissioners and and funders to actually fund the post-assembly
yeah,
process, which, as Jamie was pointing out, is where you've got these, you've got these assembly members, and there is a real danger. And I think you say it in your report that actually all that work we've done on making sure of the diversity of assembly members, suddenly it's those people with time and those
yeah,
people with confidence who are the spokespeople at the end, unless there is some resource,
yeah.
unless there is some, and what's interesting about that is it may be different people you need. It may be people like Jamie that you need rather than the process nerd. And so
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
really
and
interesting. But I feel that bit is too often forgotten.
it is the third kind of resource. Time is also money, and you need to use it wisely. And it's true that sometimes we are putting emphasis perhaps on the wrong moments of the assembly, and we underestimate the one that comes after. I do have the feeling, though, and that was shared among some of the interviewees, but this is now evolving as we speak. So in the interviews were from last week. In the last year, this has changed a little bit, and that the field is also acknowledging that there is more and more work to be done in this kind of post-assembly phase, which resembles more sort of advocacy phase. I don't know if we can still talk about communication. It's also advocacy, and I see also. I live in Brussels. More and more NGOs, submitting grants for coalition building for advocacy projects around using citizen engagement or building upon previous recommendation of all assembly. So I have a feeling that there's also a shift coming now. But this is, yeah, still a bit weak signals. Perhaps Jamie has a
Yeah. Jamie just wants to just now. I think just on that, I think we may actually be seeing certain waves here. I think that in the first couple of years of Knoca, everyone was trying to get their heads around how do we actually build follow-up mechanisms and processes within public bureaucracy. And it seems, and again, so there was a lot of focus on that. And now it seems to be a much more focus on this missing bit of how do we create an impact strategy involving assembly members and others after the process. Jamie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just a couple of things to pick up on something that Camille said and also that you said, Graham. Graham, you pointed out the danger of, okay, let's get the confident, convincing assembly members. And it's just like, well, they are inevitably privileged, right? That's not, ordinary people seeing ordinary people. That's what they always see. They see people who are confident, educated, convincing. And actually, the power. So to talk about funding for a moment, one of the groups we're working with is Pete Bryant, and Graham's on it as well. Pete Bryant's amazing assembly in Cumbria that happened 6 months ago, and we're working with the assembly members 6 months on, and they're saying, no, they're totally into it, right? But what's vital is stipends are paid so that when people who are working class people or people living in completely not privileged circumstances are absolutely looked after and held, and they have to have equal, if not more, opportunity for the kind of media and sort of presentation opportunities that we create for them. Right, that's not ticking a box. That's literally the people who everyone's going to really want to hear from. Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing is about NGOs kind of coming in. We'll do the media training for your assembly members. That scares me enormously because I've worked in NGO media training world, right? And this is different. It's absolutely different. It's not, right, let's work out your three key messages and frame it. It's not. In fact, the more authentic, the more vulnerable, to use a contentious word, the more powerful these spokesperson are. It's nothing to do with lickety spit tight NGO key messaging stuff. It doesn't work. And I'm frightened of big NGOs who are really good at getting in on everything, actually turning people against the brilliant opportunity we've got here, basically.
Yeah,
Okay.
So it's a good point, Jamie. And just one last, sorry, so Tessa, you want to go for it?
Yeah, no, just real quick, I resonate with also what Jamie's saying here, just from sort of a big organizational perspective. Like, it might not necessarily be about whether you have the communication budget, but getting in line with the communication team as to what their actual goals are, because their goals may be that they want to get the attention of the policymaker or whatever, and it's maybe convincing them, no, this is a different environment. It's about like a wider audience. So that's even a challenge I face, audience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just quickly, Camille, there's a couple of questions around this issue of kind of safe space for participants and access for journalists. And I know you kind of, I think you've actually got a box that says people do this differently.
Yes. Yeah, this is a nice one. It's true. It could have deserved a slide today. This is something we dealt in the brief, and that came up a lot in the interviews. And it's true that there are different traditions here. There are some assemblies that have been really rather closed and have done the minimal transparency requirement, which is transparency is still an important legitimacy requirement. It's usually the minimum we can do, but how we understand it can be as minimum as just having a website, and that's basically it. I think Luxembourg is a case where things were pretty close or untransparent in that matter. Well, there are other assemblies and other countries where things are much more open. Traditionally, I mean, talking for myself, I usually facilitate in France or at EU level, and these are in two instances where honestly both plenaries and working groups are open to journalists. I have myself never facilitated a citizen assembly that was completely closed to journalists, but I think it also comes. There is also some cultural elements to it, and I think I do not know how it works in all countries, but knowing my own bias in that regard, which I acknowledge, I tend still to recommend more openness, and it's better to keep it open and close rather than putting it close at the beginning, having a backlash, and having to open in a rush. And you can control the way you open with some guidelines, of course, the same as for observers. There are some good practices. There are plenty out there that you can find. I think there are some in the guidance. And if not, I'm happy to follow up bilaterally. And I think in the guidance, I also used the word of stage transparency at some point, or at least it was in an earlier draft, Graham, if it was not removed during the editing phase. But yes, to answer the question of Joanne, I think it is important. We know that there are some moments within your process that your media are going to like. I mean, it would be a strategic mistake not to use them. Now, of course, we still have a responsibility. The priority is still the integrity of the process and the safety of the members. So we're not going to stage a coup for the sake of staging a coup because it's going to make a nice article. So stage communication, stage communication, not stage deliberation, sorry. Stage communication still means that it needs to fulfill some of the basic, integrity standards that we all abide to when we deliberate.
Thanks so much. That's really helpful. We're coming to the end now, so I just wanted to give Jamie, Tessa, and yourself 30 seconds to what message do you want people to take away from it? Jamie, if you got 30 seconds of wisdom you want to share with
on
us.
your mark, set, go. Yeah, in 30 seconds, I'll just say this actually. It feels to me increasingly, it's like when the internet was invented and it was peopled by open source warriors. They discovered the absolute genius opportunity here. And now that's the stage we're at. And it's really important that we have that mentality before the proprietary software comes in and actually takes away with something that potentially is absolutely extraordinary.
Thanks, Jamie. Tessa, any words of wisdom you'd like to share, thoughts you'd like to share?
Something I think about a lot is just to be reflexive on what we consider a success. So, there's a lot in academia, things might be considered to not have been a success, when in fact, lots of things behind the scene have actually been really hard to do. And so just to think about, as Camille said, we can't do it all. So just focus on one thing. It doesn't have to be changing the world, but if things are happening, it's always going to be improving. So yeah, being realistic from that point of view, I think.
And Camille, apart from read my guidance, any last things you want to say?
I mean, do not think that communication only concerns communication experts. I think that was really for me the big. I mean, I guess it's the thing we all No, but we don't want to face hands-on. I mean, if you really want to do this work and if you want to have impact, just having a perfect process is not enough. It's not enough. And it's we are living increasingly in a world of perceptions, whether we like it or not, and whether your work is perceived as having impact actually matters. I'm sorry, perhaps it's a bit gloomy, but and that's why I think we need to be strategic, and then we can be both idealist and hero and stratege, and the communication
Yeah,
is actually very interesting in that respect.
that's a
So read the
nice.
guidance.
And last thing, read the guidance. Yeah. So that was really nice way to end, Camille. Thank you so much. I just once again want to thank Jamie and Tessa for their thoughts and offering their thoughts on something they only received a couple of days ago. But thank you so much for that. And Camille, thank you for doing this work. It's a real gap in the knowledge in our community, and you've really done a service for us, and you've written it in a really engaging way. So even if people don't always agree with you with what you're suggesting, there is now something to respond to where there wasn't before. So thank you so much for starting to fill that space. It's been once again, it's always a pleasure to bring this community together. We haven't got an event planned in the near future. We know there's going to be some more guidance coming on moving towards permanent climate assemblies, like in Brussels and Milan and other places like that. So I can imagine there will be an event soon. We're really happy to actually post events that are happening by other organisations. So if you've got things that you think our community of practice would be interested in seeing, please do reach out to us. I think, as I say, this might be the last event before the summer in the Northern Hemisphere. So if that's the case, I wish you all a wonderful summer. And once again, I want to thank Camille because she's really contributed something that we were really missing. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you've enjoyed the last hour. Take care, everybody.